Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Bill Mahan, or William Mahan, an attorney. Bill is headquartered here in San Jose, Silicon Valley area. He's been practicing law for about 31 years, has a master's in taxation, also has a LLM, a master's in letters in law from Golden Gate University, and a Juris Doctor from Santa Clara University. His practice focuses on estate planning, probate, and business planning. And so today, Bill and I are going to be talking about why you need a will. Now, before we get started, I just want to caution you to seek legal advice. This is just really, we believe, the beginning of a conversation that we hope that you'll have with your own attorney. And again, we're California practitioners, so we're going to be talking about things from a California law standpoint, and things vary a little bit from state to state, so just be aware of that as well. Okay, Bill, any guess about what percentage of the adult population doesn't have a will?
Well, there actually was a survey done fairly recently, and I did some looking into it, and according to the survey, about a third of American adults have a will, so that means 2/3 don't.
Yeah.
And less than 20% have a trust or anything beyond a will.
Okay.
So it's still by far a minority of American adults who could benefit from some kind of an estate plan who have anything at all.
Okay. So why do you think people don't get a will?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. One of the other things the survey showed was that there was a fairly large decline after 2007, and that was just because of the financial crisis and just the bad economy. So obviously,
They didn't have money to go and pay a lawyer.
yeah, people don't feel as wealthy. They don't feel like their estate is the main issue in their life. Maybe getting a job is a bigger issue for a lot of people.
Of course.
So, and then the cost, the potential cost of doing estate planning or meeting with a lawyer. So that's probably all factors in it. But there are lots of other reasons people don't do it. Part of it's just procrastination. They kind of know they should have a will. They know it's important to have a will, but they don't get around to it. It's not the first thing you think about in the day. And, sometimes they create issues for people as well. They create family issues, and you have to actually address things like, how are you going to divide things up for your children? And if somebody isn't behaving the way you wanted them to, what do you do about that? So you have to kind of take on some issues to do estate planning, and sometimes people are a little slow to do that as well. So
that's understandable. I think another thing is, it's sort of, you're facing your own mortality. Oh my gosh, I might actually die someday.
Right.
There's that word.
Yeah. There are some people who are actually fairly superstitious about it. They feel like if they do a will or they address their mortality, they probably will die or die sooner. I don't know of any evidence to support that conclusion, but I think there is a feeling like that.
Okay. Well, what eventually motivates people to go ahead and have a will done?
Usually, what I find is that it's fairly significant events that happen in people's lives that make them start thinking in terms of the big picture. So it might be an illness, it might be a death in the family, it might be the parents pass away, or a friend or someone that you know of dies, and it gets you to thinking about it. Another thing that would happen is people have children, and that's a big event that gets people thinking about the future. And how are their children going to be taken care of if something happens to them? How are they going to be raised? How are they going to be educated? And so that can be a big factor. Sometimes it's just because something is coming up. Somebody's traveling, somebody's getting on an airplane.
Yes.
We hear on the news about sometimes things happen to airplanes. And
suddenly 4-foot diameter fuselage section disappears.
Those people might be doing their will today.
They might be. Especially if they were walking down the aisle when it happened. Oh my gosh.
And then another big factor, I think, is that when people start getting advice from people, financial advisors or people like yourself, and they start getting information about how to deal with things, then oftentimes they'll get referred to an estate planner, and So part of the process is just talking about it and getting the process started.
Right. So you mentioned the thing about death of a friend, and gee, I mean, as we're getting older, it's a little scary because you see people that you know. I had a guy used to have a client who says, I used to look for my friends on the front page, and I look on the obituaries, but you know, nonetheless, you know, the statistics just happen. There's a percentage of people that do pass away,
Yes.
and so you
Every day people pass away.
right, and people that you knew from school and or that you worked with. So it's kind of difficult, but then it does maybe help us to face and think maybe I should be doing something to provide for my family or what I want to happen if something happens to me. All right, well, what happens if you don't have a will and you pass away?
Yes. Well, you know, everybody does eventually pass away, so something will happen.
Yes.
And what happens depends on what you own. It depends on what your relationships are. And it's all covered by what's called the California Probate Code, or for the most part. There are other ways that it can be dealt with as well. But most of the time it's going to be without a will. There's probably going to be a probate.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the rules for the administration of your estate, who's going to be in charge of it, and also who is going to receive your property and what amounts, will be controlled by the probate code.
Right. So in a sense, you have a will that you don't even know about.
Right. It's all laid out, and it's not really too unusual the way that the rules work. So, for example, if you're married, and if the property that you own is community property, it will pass to your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
If it's separate property, it gets divided between spouse and children. If if there's no spouse, it can go to parents. And so it's basically the rules aren't too unusual, except that they're just presumptions. So if you have something different you want to say, or your family situation is more complicated than just leaving it directly to a spouse or to children, then a will or any kind of an estate plan can actually allow you to start taking control over what happens and who is in charge of your estate and who gets your assets and when they receive the assets. So it's basically a process of taking control over your estate.
Mm-hmm. I guess another thing, I don't know if I've got this farther down, but the process I would think would take a little longer if you don't have a will. For one, I mean, there's always a possibility of claims and other things if you do have an estate plan, but on the other hand, it's a little harder to fight if you have things again defined and so forth.
Well, yeah, anytime you have an estate plan, you've started to control the what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And without saying anything, people can obviously become much more contentious about
Mm-hmm.
what they think should happen. Even the person who could be or who will be appointed to be in charge of your estate, people can fight about that. They can jostle for that
Mm-hmm.
position, and sometimes it can make a significant difference to the outcome. So I really think that even a small estate benefits from at least a basic will because you actually control who is going to be in charge. If nothing else, that's a significant thing that you would be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how's the executor named? And usually an executor is named in a will, right? So
Right.
how do they determine it?
Well, if you don't have a will, it's called intestacy.
Yes.
So you die intestate, meaning you have no testamentary documents. And then someone will be appointed. There's a priority list in the probate code as well for who could be appointed, but anybody on that list can apply, and that's how it's done. Somebody petitions the court to be appointed, and the position is called administrator.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a will, then you name a person or a list of people, and in that case it's called an executor. You can also have co-executors. You can have more than one person. But there really isn't any significant difference in the job. It's just without a will, it's an administrator. With a will, it's an executor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So here's one of the good parts. What are some considerations for small children?
Well, as I said before, one of the main reasons people become motivated to do a will or to do an estate plan is when they have children.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasons are pretty obvious. You have these young people that need somebody to take care of them and to look out for them. And if you don't have something like a will that says what's going to happen, then there are some significant problems because young children, anybody under the age of 18 actually, can't directly inherit property from parents or from anyone else. The reason being that they're under the age of majority, and as minors, they can't actually be in control of their own assets. So something would have to be done if you haven't set something up in advance where a person or an entity of some sort is appointed to be the guardian for the minor children. So again, by doing estate planning, one of the things you can do even in a will is a trust for your minor children. It's called a testamentary trust. And you can then appoint somebody to be in charge of that trust, a trustee, and to manage assets, and it can be up beyond the age of 18, which is a fairly young age for people to start, even that is a young age to start receiving property and to be in control of decision making. So with a testamentary trust, you can extend that age out to 25 or 30 or whatever age you want to choose. And in the meantime, the estate assets provide for the care of the child, the housing, education. Money can be advanced if they have something they need to do, like buy a home or start a business or something like that. So it's really quite flexible, but it protects the child and also creates a vehicle for the management of the assets so that those grow and they're used only for the things that basically the parents would have done had they been there to do it.
Yeah. So just to clarify a little bit, so because people have heard of trusts, and most of the time they hear of like revocable living trusts.
Right.
But the type of trust you're talking about is that you create a trust in the will itself,
Right.
and when you do that, then that's called a testamentary trust.
That's correct.
Okay, so just to help some of our viewers along maybe a little bit there.
Yeah, one of the significant differences is anything you do in your will only happens when you die. So that's when this trust comes into existence. The probate itself actually creates the trust, and wills are also probated, but that's where the trust is created. From the document, but during the probate. With a living trust, you set it up while you're living and you transfer assets to it while you're alive, and the part of the reason for that is not to have probate, but that's the difference between testamentary trust and living trust.
So what about the situation though, like mom and dad pass away, let's say in an accident together or whatever, having a will can help in that situation too, right, as far as who looks after the kids?
Well, yes, you can in the will itself you can nominate a guardian or a list of people that would be your choice of the person to take over custody of the children. I do it myself as a separate document, not as part of the will, because people sometimes change their mind, and rather than have to do a new will or a codicil to their will, I just have a document that's called nomination of guardian, and then it goes to the court no matter what, because it's a nomination, and the court decides if in fact that person is in the best interest of the child to be the guardian. But when you nominate somebody, it doesn't have to be a family member. It usually is, but it doesn't have to be. What you do by nominating somebody is you put them to the top of the priority list for who would be appointed.
Right. So again, I mean, many people are very concerned about the values of the people that and the compatibility, and they should be.
Right.
You know, so you don't want your child to end up with an auntie, for example, who maybe they're just don't really get along with.
Right.
And so if you can find a better place for them.
There are a lot of factors when I'm talking with my clients. It has to do with their values, the kind of home that they want their child to be raised in. It also has to do with the age of the children. When they're very small children, you might have one idea in mind for who would be a good custodial person. When they're older, you know, they have a life of their own. Sometimes one of the issues is just not having to make them move somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, so who you pick to be the guardian depends on a lot of different factors, and it's one of the harder decisions people have to make, really.
Yeah, yeah. So but there are a lot of people, they may think, oh, I don't have any property or much property, so I guess I don't really need a will. But you see, we're talking about issues that don't have to do with property at all.
And the other thing is sometimes they're not thinking in terms of the property they have, because one of the assets they might have is life insurance, for example. So sometimes estates are created when a person dies that didn't really exist before. Or I've even had cases where the person died in a traffic accident and there was a large settlement, and all of a sudden no estate became a very large estate.
Yeah.
So
you don't know.
Yeah, you don't really know what there's going to be to deal with.
Okay.